Hello and welcome, fellow Kerbonauts. Today we're going to begin a series looking at how you construct bases. This is Brendan the Kerbal Man, and I will be presenting for you a few strategies I have found helpful. Today we're going to be focusing on a strategy that doesn't come from me, but I actually found on the forums. But I do think it's really helpful, so we're going to look at it, and I will make sure to link to the place I first learned about this, so that those of you who are finding it for the first time can go give credit to the people who came up with it instead of me. So essentially what we're going to be doing here is using a combination of landing legs and rovers to move our science parts around, to move our base pieces around, and we're going to practice this method on Kerbin before we take it up to Mimus, where our base is going to eventually be stationed. So when you're building a base, the two main problems you face are how to line up the docking ports and how to deliver the base to the ground, and how to basically how to connect the base and how to deliver it. And so there are two ways that we can connect a base. We can either connect it in space and then land it as one large landing unit, or we can connect it on the ground. If you do it in space, it's okay, but you're not going to get a very large base because you can only land so much of a base before it becomes unstable and you can't put it on the ground. Now, on the ground, the problem is it's hard to line up the docking ports because the new landing legs have suspension, and so do the tires, the rover wheels, and so they're not going to line up perfectly. Now, my technique for fixing that, which once again I got off the forums from Kerbal Space Program, is to do what I'm about to show you. So, the first thing we're going to do is attach a modular grid segment using mirrored symmetry and angle snap. So it's going to appear on both sides, and it's going to be angled tangent to the craft. Mirrored symmetry, angle snap, tangent to the craft. These are going to be perfectly in line if viewed head on. The reason that we can't use just symmetry mode is that if we turn on symmetry mode, all of these different points are tangent, and you see how if I put this piece right here, it's actually set further back from the other ones. That is not what we want, so we are going to do mirrored symmetry and angle snap on. And now we're going to attach, we're going to adjust these grid segments so that they're facing down by using our rotation button. So I'm going to grab them and rotate them down 90 degrees. This is a little bit of part clipping, and there are those who say that part clipping like this is cheating. Once again, I'm going to kind of stand by my argument that if I was NASA, I could build a grid segment that fits in this little spot perfectly, and so I don't necessarily think it's cheating. Alright, now we're going to do our landing legs. We're going to, once again, like I did with my rovers, if you watch the rover video, I bring them up from the bottom and then flip them so that they're at the very lowest point possible, and I'm going to do the same thing here. So that they're at the very lowest point ever possible, and then we're going to extend them, and they're facing the wrong way, so we have to spin them around 180 degrees. Alright, the other thing to note, your life is going to be much easier if your pod, if the lab module, whatever you're connecting, is symmetrical, so that the mass is at the very center. So, because we're just doing a demonstration, I'm going to do this the easiest way I know, which is just by literally making it symmetrical. And that's only really necessary in this case because it is a demonstration. If your version of this is not perfect, you will be okay. But the closer your center of mass is to the middle of the vehicle, the happier you're going to be. And that looks pretty good to me. Alright, now we're going to rotate the whole thing 90 degrees. Come on. Oh, and this is something else that's important to note. You have to have the ability to control every single module that you're going to be transporting individually at some point. So even though this piece is never going to be moving on its own, it does need some sort of probe core so that I can raise and lower the landing legs, because it will have to do that by itself. Now we're going to add a docking port to the underside of the module, and we have to do this the exact way I described, because it's really important that the docking port is the right height, roughly speaking, from the ground. So we're going to leave angle snap on, and we're going to line up a BZ52 radial attachment point directly over the center of mass. That's actually not quite perfect enough. That's good enough for me. Alright, now we can turn off center of mass. We're going to attach a cubic octagonal strut directly into the middle of the attachment point we just added. And then beyond that, sorry, beyond that, we're going to put a clampatron docking port, which is going to sit directly on top of the octagonal strut. And you can tell it's on top of, if you can see this little darker part, then it's on top of. If you can't see it, then it's not on that. It's actually sitting on the wrong piece. Alright. That looks just about good enough. See right there, it's not good enough. Sorry, this part's a little bit tricky. There we go. That looks pretty perfect. And if we turn on the center of mass, I'm going to guess that it's going to line up pretty much perfectly. Yeah. There we go. That is good enough for me. Great. So we're going to rotate this vehicle 180 degrees. Not 180 degrees, sorry. 90 degrees. And it is good to go. Just to make a point, the reason you have to do these with angle snap is that now any module that I choose to connect to my base, as long as it's the same size, will have the same height from the ground. And that means that the docking ports will line up. And I'm about to demonstrate that for you in just a second. But first, we want to launch this vehicle as our lab. And launch it. Just to put it on the ground. And now we're going to go to building the Rover. And the Rover is the vehicle piece that's going to steer this lab. And I'm going to talk about the little parts that go into that, and then I'll drive it on over. So we can get a proper demonstration of everything that goes in to one of these. No. Great. So we are going to go to the Space Center, switch over to the VAB, and load our rover. It's already been built. I just want to talk about it for a few seconds so you know exactly what I've put forth and how I designed it. There we go. Alright. Load. Should be the autosave ship. Yep, there we go. The only thing to note, when you see this landed on Mimis, I'm going to have put RCS little fuel tanks on it and RCS thrusters. But because we're on Kerbal, if we add that, we actually lose our thrust to weight and we can no longer fly it. And it has to be able to fly up to dock. So I have the same docking port here. Solar panels, batteries, 4 wheels, and it is very low profile to the ground. Those are the main things that matter. We're just going to drive it on out, and we will show you what it looks like. Oh, the other important thing, it has a little spark engine on an orange tank, and this is so that it can take off and land safely. I'm not 100% certain, but I bet, outside of Eve, that this vehicle has good thrust to weight almost everywhere. Yeah. So this is going to be an effective rover for anywhere you want to put a base, except for on Eve. And if you're trying to land a base on Eve that you're actually going to recover people from, if you're at that stage in your career, you don't need my help. Because Eve is a nightmare. I've done one return mission from there, and it took forever. But maybe someday I'll do a video on that if people want. Alright, so here's our little rover. We are going to drive it on over to the lab. We'll set that as the target, and do our best to drive it on over. When you're driving a rover, especially if we're going a long ways, do turn on your auto warp, because if you don't, you are going to find yourself in a situation where your rover explodes for no reason, and you've spent hours building it, and then you have to reload the whole thing, and you forgot to quick save. Not that I have any personal experience with that, but I do recommend being smart about your rover maneuvering. Alright, and now we are on the hill. Go on up. There we go, little guy. He's pretty maneuverable, actually. Even at a high physics warp, he still seems to be doing really good. Is it sexist of me that I think my rover is a man? I don't know. That's a question no one here has any interest in but me. Alright. Braking. And now I'm going to quick save just because you don't want to hit the lab, accidentally bust the legs, and then get in a position where you have to go back to ground zero, start over. One nice thing about doing this on the runway is that there are these little lines to line you up so that you know if you're going to be centered or not. That can really help out, especially if you have some trouble driving perfectly straight. Alright, let's physics warp the rest of the way so that you're not stuck watching me talk and try to narrate. Oh, we have a Build Kerbal in here to help out. Graciously volunteered his time. Bill is an engineer, which, if you're going to build a base, you really want a high-level engineer, especially if you're using this rover method, because those tires are prone to prop, the legs are prone to break. The game is pretty unforgiving if you make a mistake in any of those areas, and nothing is worse than landing your base and realizing you can't actually do the final maneuver because the tires broke or whatever. Alright. And slow on down. Alright. There is our lab, and we are going to get set for this last maneuver. But before we do, I just want to line us up a little bit smoother. Great. And now I want to talk about one error I made in my rover construction that you should avoid. Because I set this up in symmetry mode, the tires don't exactly turn in the best way. It's better to really just have one set of tires that rotates. So we are going to invert the steering on the front tires, just so that the vehicle is going to be a little more stable. It's not going to turn as quickly, but it is going to turn a little bit more stable. It's going to be less likely to spin when it turns, which is going to matter more to me in the next little bit. So now I'm going to select my docking port. I'm going to control from here. And now I'm going to select the lab's docking port and set it as my target. And I'm just slowly driving under it, and I'm going to try to line this up perfectly. Brake! I recommend you using the click for brake instead of just hitting B, because you really want to make sure that you can lock your braking perfectly. There we go. It's kind of like doing an RCS maneuver. And there we see the target node approaching, and it is perfectly lined up. So all we have to do now is make sure we don't shoot off too fast. and you're going to be prone to have this happen. If you are really experiencing a lot of trouble with it, you can lower the engine power on the motors in your on your wheels a little bit, and that will make it a little bit simpler. But I think we're about to get it perfectly. Docking in space, I think, is much easier than docking on land, but that's going to be good enough. With this, because I have the ability to, I do rotate all the way around just to check that we're lined up. And now we're going to quick save, because this part can get dicey no matter how perfect the rest of your design has been. So I'm going to hit X, kill my throttle, hit spacebar to engage my liquid fuel engine, and then I'm going to hit Shift and slowly boost on up. And hopefully we will line up perfectly and connect with the lab. Great. Everything has gone excellent. So now you can see the rover is floating off the ground and being supported by the gears of the lab. So now we need to raise these landing gear. And the best way I know to do this is if you hit the gear button, it's going to lower the vehicle. And sometimes it'll let you steer the rover still, and other times it'll turn off your steering. So I just have to fiddle with the brakes a little bit to get it back to go. So now we are officially driving our piece. And if I need to brake desperately, there are two ways to do it. I can either back up, or I can deploy the landing gear. And when the landing gear hits the surface, it'll basically just lift the tires right off the ground and stop our movement. Great. So we have our target down here. We're going to be heading towards the test module 2, which I actually wish I would have driven a little bit more over because it is not quite in the right position. So we will be slowly rotating. These things came back online somehow. There. Now you're going to see that it turns actually much quicker. Yeah, see the difference? Before, when I was holding down D, we were barely getting any rotation, and now we are really moving along. Alright, so we're going to aim for the rear docking port on this target test module 2. And I do recommend testing it. If you're not going to build the whole base out in the grass here, you have to at least build the parts that are most important. That being, you have to make sure that your rovers are going to work and that in principle, your idea is going to be sound. It's not 100% necessary that everything be tested, but you do want to test as much as possible. And last time I shot this video, I flipped this irrevocably here. So here's hoping that I don't flip us backwards. But as you can see, the problem with the stability here is that because the center of mass is now raised much higher than the actual rover, it's very top heavy. So it's like you carrying a massive bookshelf or something, where it's not very stable. You don't feel very stable in that position because the weight you're carrying is too massive. So I'm really lowering my target velocity before we go over this hill, because I know that we're going to be likely to flip out. And now I'm actually not touching it all. I'm just going to let us go down the hill the whole way. And now I will start to brake now that we're down the hill. And we are going to way overshoot it, but that's okay, as long as we don't go too far. Great. And I'm just going to flip us so that we're actually going to control from this docking port. It's nice if you double up the docking ports, you actually will have the opportunity to just rotate instead of and I didn't pop any tires on that hill. I'm pretty proud of myself. The first time I did this video, the whole thing flipped and exploded and we had to start over. This is actually the third time Rovers are hard, and bases are hard. It's much easier to build a station. If you're doing a career mode, add up the math of how much money it's going to cost you to build those bases before you start signing the contracts. In my first career playthrough, I got stuck on a massive career contract for a base on Duna, and the base ended up costing drastically more than the contract was worth, and I just didn't really think about it when I made it and ended up getting kind of screwed for it. So now we are slowly rotating ourselves to be facing the test module. I'm actually going to let us go a little bit past it, and now we're going to turn hard. This is kind of similar in many ways to the crawler that NASA uses, I'm just realizing, although their crawler is obviously much larger than this vehicle. They would tell me that's why my vehicle is not as stable as theirs. Alright, so we're going to slow this thing down. And actually, I'm going to deploy the gears. And I'm going to quick save, because we really don't want to be in a position where our vehicle is not... if something goes wrong here, I don't want to have to go back to the beginning of the video. Alright, so now I'm going to take the gears up on this module, so that this is now sitting on its rover. This one's a little less stable because the rover is much larger, but we're just going to... because the payload is much larger, but I did manage to drive it down that hill just the same, so we should be good. We're going to set this as the target, and hopefully we will be pointing pretty much straight at it. Alright, now we're going to flip to the other rover. Hey, Bill. And we are going to lift those landing legs up so that we are back on the rover itself. Now notice that both modules for the base are on the exact same rover at the exact same height. So they're going to line up identically when we drive forward. You can see right here that it's a perfect match. So now we just need to increase our velocity ever so slightly. And in just a few seconds, we will have a perfect base lineup. And we will then lower the landing gear, and we can drive the rovers away. 3, 2, I'm going to slow this down a little bit because we don't want to explode. 1, that looks... And it does look like that one's a little bit higher, but I think it's going to be A-okay. And now it's not doing what I need it to. Let's see if this is docking. I think what's actually happening here is that there's a slight inclination in the train that's making it so they don't line up perfectly. There we go. So what I did there is I just fiddled a little bit with the W, S, and D to just wobble the vehicle slightly up and down. And so now that I have lifted the rover off the ground, and look, it's actually even on a slight incline and it's still lined up. So now that these are connected on the ground, I can actually decouple the rovers. And drive them out. That's one rover free. And this should be another. Funk. This one looks like it's been trapped in here, but we can probably get it out by lifting up some of these landing gear. I don't know exactly why this got stuck in there, but we'll be able to remove it. There, that. This should give us enough clearance to do so. Alright, I will sit here fiddling with this for a minute. There we go. Oops. And the base is going to flip. Well, I lifted the wrong landing legs, but you do get the point. This system is going to let you build a base of as many parts as you want, however you want. It is a perfectly workable system for any situation involving rovers, involving your base. And now that I'm at the end of the video, obviously that part's falling apart. But the base is connected, and if I would have driven that out a little more smoothly, we would have been left with 2 reusable rovers that can now attach the next piece of the mission without problem. And the nice thing about this is that if I decide I want to put a different section, maybe a hitchhiker module, in between here, I can separate these two, pick it up on the rover, drive it away, and put it back. So that is my first video on how to set up a base. Once you have this skill down, you can pretty much build however many you want. The next thing we're going to talk about in the following video is how to land the different pieces of your base in perfect, not perfect, but as close to each other as possible without using any mods outside of the Kerbal engineer. But mostly we're just going to be using map mode for that. And then from there, we're just going to go over, I'll show a little bit of how I set up my base in the next video, and that'll be it. And then we'll move on to some other interesting things. I hope you enjoy the video. If you have any questions, comments, or requests, let me know. This is Brendan signing out. Thanks.